There was once a girl who grew up in a town where winter seemed never to end. The sea there wasn't blue or green. It was the color of steel, cold, heavy, and unwelcoming. Ships came and went, carrying people who always looked tired, their faces cracked by wind and salt. That town, far in the north of Russia, lived quietly under the constant hum of machinery and the sigh of the ocean. People worked, people survived, and the seasons changed without ever really changing at all. And in one of those narrow streets covered in snow and smoke, a girl named Anya Petrova came into the world. Anya's life began in a small apartment that smelled of bread, oil, and the faint scent of sea air that slipped in through the cracks of the window. Her father, Konstantin Petrova, was a ship mechanic, a man who spent more time around steel than people. He was tall and quiet, with rough hands and eyes that carried both exhaustion and peace. He fixed things, engines, broken radios, anything that made noise and could be mended. Her mother, Olga, was the opposite. She was gentle, talkative, always with a soft laugh and warm hands that carried the smell of hospital soap. She worked as a nurse at the town hospital, and she often came home late, her uniform carrying traces of other people's pain. Despite the cold that ruled their world, their home was full of warmth. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and in that little apartment, that was enough. Her father would come home with grease on his face and stories about the ships he repaired. Her mother would heat soup on the stove, and the three of them would eat together while the wind howled outside like a restless spirit. Those were the nights when Anya felt safest, surrounded by the sound of her parents' voices and the rhythm of their laughter. From her father, Anya learned patience. He used to say, "Everything that moves has a rhythm, Anya. When you find the rhythm, you can fix it." He meant engines, but she thought it also meant people, that maybe everyone had a rhythm you just needed to understand. From her mother, she learned kindness, but also silence. Olga was the kind of woman who knew that sometimes silence healed faster than words. She could calm a crying child or a broken heart with nothing more than a look. Anya loved that about her. She loved everything about them. The town wasn't an easy place to grow up. Winters lasted half the year, and even summer felt like a brief apology from the sky. People lived hard lives, long shifts at the docks, low pay, and the constant struggle to keep families fed. But for Anya, it was all she knew. She would walk home from school watching the cranes by the harbor move like tired giants. The sound of metal and waves became her lullaby. And then there was Mikhail. He was a boy from her neighborhood, 2 years older, always smiling even when there was nothing to smile about. Mikhail was the kind of person who dreamed out loud. While everyone else talked about surviving the winter, he talked about leaving the town, about seeing Moscow, about starting a new life somewhere where the sea didn't freeze. He used to tell Anya stories about the city, how the lights there never went out, how people wore real leather shoes, and how no one ever remembered your past. To Anya, that sounded like magic. She liked being around him because when he spoke, she could almost believe that escape was possible, that maybe she wasn't a tea meant to live and die in that same frozen place like everyone else. They would sit by the pier, feet dangling above the icy water, and make promises that felt like prayers. One day, Mikhail would say, "We'll go to Moscow together. You'll study, I'll work. We'll start fresh." Anya would smile, not because she fully believed him, but because it felt good to have something to believe in. She'd close her eyes and imagine it, the city lights, the sound of trains, and a life where her parents didn't have to worry about money, a life where she could breathe. For a while, everything seemed fine, ordinary even. Her father was proud of her grades, her mother kept dreaming of better years, and Mikhail's letters, filled with plans and hope, made her days brighter. But life has a way of turning quietly, without warning. It doesn't shout before it changes. Sometimes it just decides, without reason, to stop being kind. It began on a night like any other. The wind was louder than usual, and her father had left earlier that morning for an overnight shift at the shipyard. Anya was studying by the lamp when she smelled something. Smoke. Not the soft, comforting smell of wood smoke that lingered in their home every winter, but something darker. Burnt metal. Rubber. Then, sirens. Distant, echoing through the cold air. Her mother froze at the window, her face pale. Outside, the horizon was red. The shipyard, the heart of their town, was on fire. At first, no one knew how it started. People ran to the docks, their voices lost under the screams and the crackling flames. The air was thick and hot, even though the snow was still falling. Machines groaned and collapsed under their own weight. Sparks rained down on the sea, hissing out like dying stars. Anya tried to run after her mother, who was already halfway down the street, but the police stopped them. "No one goes past this line," they shouted. "It's not safe." The sky turned black that night, and so did Anya's childhood. Hours later, her father was found, alive, but barely. His face was covered in soot, his hands burned. He had been helping others escape until a beam fell, trapping him. They brought him home at dawn. Olga cleaned his wounds quietly, her hands trembling. He didn't say much, just kept staring at his hands as if they no longer belonged to him. In the days that followed, the rumors began. People whispered that the fire wasn't an accident, that it was planned, that someone had been trying to destroy the shipyard from the inside, for money, for control, for power. And soon enough, a name appeared in the gossip: Konstantin Petrova, Anya's father. At first, Anya thought it was a cruel joke. Her father? The man who spent his whole life repairing things? The man who stayed late every night to keep the machines running? But the story spread like wildfire, faster than the flames that had destroyed the docks. The newspapers hinted at worker negligence. The officials said they had proof. And then there was Viktor Sokolov, a businessman whose face Anya had seen on billboards and local TV. He arrived in town 2 days after the fire, calm, smiling, already talking about rebuilding. They said he was an investor, that he wanted to help the town recover, that he would bring jobs back. But her father knew better. He knew the fire had made one man richer than anyone else, Sokolov himself. But no one listened. No one ever does when a poor man speaks against the powerful. By the end of that week, Anya's father was taken away by the police. They said it was for questioning. They said it would only take a few hours. But he never came home that night. Her mother broke apart quietly. She stopped eating. She stopped laughing. She would sit by the window with her hands in her lap, waiting, hoping. The house grew silent, the kind of silence that makes every sound feel too loud. Anya started working part-time at a local store to buy food. Her classmates stopped talking to her. The neighbors who once borrowed sugar and bread now closed their doors when she passed. And Mikhail disappeared. One day he stopped coming to school. His letters stopped. His voice was gone from the docks. Anya later heard he'd gone to Moscow, maybe to work, maybe to study. No one really knew. But she couldn't stop wondering if he had left because of her, or because of the whispers surrounding her family's name. It was as if life itself had decided to turn away from her. Every day became a repetition of fear and waiting. Waiting for news, waiting for the truth, waiting for her father to walk through the door again. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into something worse: acceptance. And then, one morning, it finally came. A letter from the court, a verdict. Her father had been found guilty of negligence. The punishment wasn't just a sentence. It was a label that would follow their family forever. Her mother cried for the first and last time that day, and Anya, sitting beside her, felt something inside her start to crack. The letter lay on the table like a wound that refused to close. Her mother read it once, twice, 3 times, as if the words might change if she looked hard enough. Negligence resulting in death and destruction of state property. That was the charge. The words were cold, bureaucratic, but behind them was a truth that burned. Her father was being punished not for what he did, but for what someone else had done. For days, Olga barely moved. She sat by the window with her hands clasped together, whispering prayers to a God that had long stopped answering. Anya tried to be strong, to do the things her mother couldn't: cook, clean, fetch water. But she was only 17, and strength doesn't come easy when your world is falling apart. Then came the knock on the door. 2 officers stood there, their faces blank, their coats dusted with snow. They said her father wanted to see them, one last time before he was transferred to another facility. Anya's mother dressed quickly, wrapping herself in layers of wool. They took the long road to the detention center, past the harbor where black water lapped against the frozen shore. When they saw Konstantin, he was thinner. His hands were trembling, his eyes sunken but still kind. He smiled when he saw them, but it wasn't the kind of smile that comforted. It was one that said goodbye without using words. Olga broke down the moment she touched his hands. He whispered to her, quietly, urgently, but Anya couldn't hear what he said. When she finally stepped forward, he looked at her for a long time. "You have your mother's heart," he said softly. "Don't lose it, no matter what happens." Those were his last words to her. 3 days later, he was found dead in his cell. The official report said suicide. They said he hanged himself with a bedsheet. But when his body was returned, Anya saw the marks on his wrists. Deep, dark, wrong. His hands were tied. Her mother refused to believe it at first. Then she stopped speaking altogether. The funeral was small. A few of his old co-workers came, silent and scared. Most of the town pretended not to know them anymore. People like to forget tragedy when it's close to home. It reminds them how fragile their own lives are. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, snow began to fall again. Soft, almost gentle, as if the sky was trying to apologize. Anya stood there, numb, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her father had fixed machines his whole life, but in the end, no one could fix the system that broke him. After the funeral, the silence in their home became unbearable. Her mother moved like a ghost, whispering to the empty air, sometimes calling her husband's name as if he were still in the next room. The food went untouched, the lights stayed off, and the days blurred into each other. Anya worked longer hours at the store, pretending the world outside still mattered. And then one day she saw him, Viktor Sokolov. He arrived in town again, surrounded by men in black coats, smiling for the cameras. The newspapers praised him for reopening the shipyard. "A new era," the headlines read. "Jobs returned to Murmansk thanks to Sokolov's generosity." People cheered. The same people who had turned their backs on the Petrovas now clapped for the man who had destroyed them. Anya watched from across the street, her hands trembling inside her pockets. The man's smile was smooth, confident, untouchable. She wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth. But what truth? Who would listen to the daughter of a dead man branded a criminal? That night she went home and found her mother sitting by the window again, her eyes distant. Olga spoke for the first time in weeks. Her voice was quiet, like a whisper that had waited too long to be heard. "They killed him, Anya. They killed him and made us thank them for it." Then she fell silent once more, and that silence lasted the rest of her life. Months passed. The shipyard flourished under Sokolov's control. New workers came, new machines arrived, and the town pretended to forget the fire. The Petrova apartment became colder, emptier. Anya kept to herself. She stopped going out, stopped speaking to old friends. The people who used to know her now looked away when they passed her on the street, and then, one morning, her mother didn't wake up. No one knew if it was sickness or sorrow that took her. The doctors called it heart failure. Anya called it something else, giving up. She buried her mother beside her father, alone, under a gray sky that refused to clear. By the time the earth settled over the graves, Anya Petrova had nothing left. No family, no friends, no home that felt like home. But she still had memory, and anger. For a while, she drifted, working odd jobs, staying in small rooms that smelled of dust and smoke. Every night, she replayed the same questions in her mind. Why did they do it? Who helped him? How did they get away with it? Those questions were like stones in her chest, heavy but keeping her alive. She began reading laws, reports, records, anything about the fire, about Sokolov, about the company that took over the docks. Late at night, she'd walk by the harbor, staring at the glowing signs with his name on them. The world had crowned him a savior. She knew he was a thief. It was around that time she started seeing Mikhail again, not in person, but in headlines. A photo in a magazine showed him standing beside Sokolov, wearing a suit, shaking hands. The caption read, "Young manager rises through ranks of Sokolov Maritime Group." Anya stared at that photo for a long time. The boy who once dreamed of escaping the cold had become part of it. That night, she didn't cry. She couldn't. She just felt something shift inside her. A quiet, slow freezing. The kind of cold that doesn't touch the skin, only the soul. She began saving money. She took extra shifts, learned new skills, accounting, machinery, even basic law. She stopped being the girl who waited for justice. Instead, she started becoming someone else, someone who would make justice happen. People said she was quiet now, focused, different. But no one saw what was growing beneath the surface, the plan forming, the patience building. Her father had once told her, "Everything that moves has a rhythm." She finally understood what that meant. To destroy something, you first have to understand how it works. Years passed. The town changed again. The old factory workers were replaced by younger men who didn't know the past. The children who once whispered about the Petrovas grew up and forgot. But Anya remembered. Every face, every name, every lie. She left town at 22. No one saw her go. No one asked where she was heading. But those who had known her, the few who still cared to remember, said she had the look of someone walking towards something, not away from it. And they were right. Because Anya Petrova was not running anymore. She was hunting. Before she left, she returned one last time to the harbor. The water was calm, the air sharp with the smell of oil. She stood there, looking at the lights of the new shipyard, Sokolov's shipyard, gleaming like teeth in the dark. And she whispered quietly to herself, almost like a promise. "You took everything from me, my family, my peace, my name. But I'm still here, and I will come for you." The wind carried her words across the frozen sea. Somewhere far off, a ship's horn echoed, deep and lonely. It sounded like an answer. That night, she boarded a train to St. Petersburg, carrying only a small suitcase and a heart full of silence. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The girl who once dreamed of leaving Murmansk was gone. In her place was a woman forged by loss, tempered by betrayal, and sharpened by time. And though the town would forget her name, one day, it would remember her vengeance. That night, something inside her froze, not from the winter outside, but from the silence inside her. When the train pulled into St. Petersburg, Anya Petrova stepped out into a world that didn't know her name. And for the first time, that was exactly what she wanted. The city was a living beast, loud, bright, full of motion. Cars rushed by like blood through arteries. Lights flickered on the river. People moved with purpose, their eyes fixed forward, as if looking back was a luxury no one could afford. Anya had never seen so many faces in one place. Each one looked different, yet somehow the same. Hungry, tired, chasing something invisible. She rented a small room in an old building near the docks. The walls were thin, the water ran brown, but it was enough. She found work in a warehouse, sorting shipments and keeping records. The pay was small, but it bought her time to watch, to listen, to learn. At night, she would walk along the Neva River, watching the reflections of the city lights ripple across the water. It reminded her of home, the frozen sea she had left behind, but this time the ice was inside her. Every sound, every face, every injustice she saw in the city, all of it fed that cold fire inside her chest. For months, she lived quietly. She spoke little, trusted no one. But Anya was observant. She noticed how money moved, how people bowed to those who had power, how names opened doors that hard work never could. She started to understand the rhythm of the city, just like her father had once told her. Everything that moves has a rhythm. Find it, and you can control it. In the evenings, she began taking night classes, accounting, corporate law, finance. The other students thought she was just another quiet girl trying to survive. They didn't know she was studying the language of the people who had destroyed her life. Every new thing she learned, how shell companies worked, how bribes were hidden, how contracts were twisted. It was like learning the enemy's code. Years passed like that. Her grief hardened into focus. Her kindness, once open and soft, became something else, precise, deliberate. She could smile when needed, lie when necessary, and blend in wherever she went. She became invisible, and invisibility was power. By the time she was 26, Anya had built a new name for herself, Anya Petrova, an efficient and intelligent financial clerk. No one in the city knew her story. To them, she was polite, reliable, forgettable, perfect. One evening, while she was sorting invoices at her office, a name appeared on a document that stopped her heart for a second: Sokolov Maritime Group, the same company that had destroyed her family's life, the same name she had whispered in hatred for years. The company was expanding into St. Petersburg, buying small shipping firms, building influence, and the man leading their financial division, Mikhail Antonov. She read the name again and again, her eyes tracing every letter. It couldn't be a coincidence. Mikhail, the boy from the harbor, the one who had promised they'd leave together, was now working for the man who ruined everything. Anya sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in her hands. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside her, something darker began to stir. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she searched everything she could about Viktor Sokolov and his empire. The internet was full of praise, charity donations, awards, smiling photographs. But behind the glossy image, there were patterns: shell companies, sudden deaths, vanished journalists. All the things that power hides behind polite words and expensive suits. She began collecting reports, articles, names, little pieces of truth scattered across the web. She filled notebooks with connections, diagrams, timelines. Slowly, the web began to form, and in the center of it, Viktor Sokolov. But if she wanted to destroy him, she needed to get close. A few months later, Sokolov Maritime announced a new office opening in St. Petersburg. They were hiring. Anya, or rather, Anya Petrova, applied. Her resume was clean, impressive, and forgettable. She passed the interviews easily. Within weeks, she was sitting in a sleek glass building, working for the very machine that had once crushed her family. The first time she saw Mikhail again was like seeing a ghost wearing someone else's face. He was taller, sharper, dressed in tailored suits, his smile rehearsed. He didn't recognize her, not yet. Why would he? The Anya he knew had died years ago in a small frozen town. She studied him quietly during meetings, watching how he spoke to people, how easily he laughed with Sokolov himself. He wasn't the boy who dreamed of freedom anymore. He was part of the system now, polished, confident, dangerous. For weeks, she said nothing. She worked, observed, blended in. But she never stopped watching. One day she stayed late at the office. Mikhail came by, surprised to see her still there. He smiled, the same smile she remembered from the pier. "You're new, right? Anna, isn't it?" She nodded, her voice calm. "Yes. Just trying to make a good impression." He laughed softly. "That's how it starts. Then the work never ends." He walked away, unaware that he had just spoken to the ghost of his past. Over the next few months, Anya used her position carefully. She gained access to financial records, internal communications, quiet transactions that never reached the public. What she found confirmed what she had always known. Sokolov's empire was built on corruption, bribery, and blood. She copied files, encrypted data, and stored them away. Every secret she uncovered was another weapon for later. She began connecting with journalists under false names, feeding them small leaks, nothing that could trace back to her. Each leak shook the company a little more, but revenge isn't a straight path. It's a slow dance. One step forward, two steps back. Sokolov was a careful man. He had built walls around himself made of fear and loyalty. No one questioned him. Those who tried disappeared quietly: a car crash, a suicide, a sudden transfer. Anya knew that if she made one mistake, she'd join that list. Still, she pushed on. One night, Mikhail invited her to a company gala, a grand event celebrating another successful year. She wore a black dress, her hair pinned neatly, her expression calm. The ballroom was filled with powerful people, the kind who smiled while hiding knives. When Viktor Sokolov entered, the room fell silent for a moment. He was older now, grayer hair, heavier frame, but his eyes were still sharp. He moved through the crowd like a man who owned it. Anya watched him carefully, her pulse steady. For years, she had imagined this moment, seeing him again, face to face. She had imagined anger, rage, maybe tears. But instead, she felt nothing, only a quiet certainty. He stopped to shake hands, his laughter booming. When their eyes met across the room, he smiled politely, unaware that the woman he had destroyed stood just a few meters away. Later that night, she slipped out onto the balcony for air. Mikhail joined her, glass in hand. "Quite a night," he said, leaning against the railing. She nodded, looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever think about the people who built all this?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "The ones who worked in the factories, in the shipyards, the ones who never got a share of the glory." He shrugged. "That's how it is. Some win, some lose." Anya smiled faintly, turning away so he wouldn't see the look in her eyes. "Some lose," she thought, "because people like you decide who gets to win." After that night, she knew there was no trace of the boy she once loved. Mikhail was gone, replaced by ambition. So she stopped hesitating. Her plan grew larger, sharper. She began tracing offshore accounts, finding where Sokolov hid his money. She reached out to one of his competitors under another identity, feeding them inside information in exchange for access to their databases. Piece by piece, she was dismantling the empire from within. But power doesn't fall quietly. The more she dug, the more dangerous it became. One morning, she found her apartment door slightly open. Nothing was stolen, but her files had been moved. Someone had been there, watching. From that day, she knew the game had begun. She changed addresses, burned everything physical, moved her evidence to encrypted drives hidden in different places. She trusted no one. Yet even through the fear, there was clarity. She was closer than ever. And then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, she was called to deliver a report to Sokolov's private office. It was her first time standing so close to him. The room smelled of leather and old cigars. He barely looked up when she entered. "Put it there," he said, motioning to the desk. His voice was calm, deep, almost kind, but it was the same voice that had ordered her father's silence years ago. Anya placed the folder down and turned to leave, but he stopped her. "What's your name again?" "Anna," she replied softly. "Anna," he repeated, nodding slowly. "You've done good work. We need more people like you." She smiled politely, her pulse steady. "Thank you, sir." And as she walked out, she realized something important. He didn't remember her. The man who had destroyed her life didn't even remember the name Petrova. To him, it had been just another transaction, another signature, another problem solved. That realization didn't weaken her, it focused her. Because revenge is not about being remembered. It's about making sure they can't forget you when it matters most. That night, she stood by her window, looking at the city lights once more. It had taken her nearly 10 years to get here, from the frozen docks of Murmansk to the heart of her enemy's empire. But she was finally inside the machine, and she knew its rhythm. Everything that moves has a rhythm. Once you find it, you can fix it, or destroy it. Her father's words echoed again, no longer as memory, but as prophecy. And in that quiet room, beneath the endless hum of the city, Anya Petrova made her final promise. "You built your kingdom on ashes. Now I'll show you how easily it burns." It began quietly. No explosions, no sudden chaos, just small cracks forming beneath the surface of a flawless empire. First, a local journalist published an exposé about Sokolov Maritime's hidden offshore accounts. The report was detailed, precise, and impossible to trace. Then came another, a whistleblower inside the company, leaking evidence of embezzlement. And another, a leaked photo showing Sokolov meeting with a government minister under suspicious circumstances. Each story alone was manageable, but together they formed a storm. Inside the company, panic spread like smoke. Emails were deleted, phones were smashed, meetings held behind closed doors. Sokolov roared through corridors demanding answers, while Mikhail stayed quiet, his calm beginning to crack. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Anya Petrova, still hidden under the name Anya Petrov, watched it unfold with silent satisfaction. She never smiled, but sometimes late at night, her reflection in the glass would. She didn't need to act directly anymore. She had planted enough seeds, data leaks, fake invoices, insider connections, that the collapse had become self-sustaining. The empire was eating itself alive. But Anya knew the end wasn't complete without truth, without him knowing who had done this. So she began the final part of her plan. One evening, she invited Mikhail for a drink. They hadn't spoken outside work much, but he agreed easily. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of guilt he didn't yet understand. They met in a quiet bar near the river, the kind of place where secrets could breathe. "You've been distant lately," he said, sipping his drink. "You seem distracted." She looked at him, eyes calm. "Just tired of pretending." He frowned. "Pretending what? That this company is clean. That what we do doesn't destroy lives." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they want to avoid the truth. "You sound like one of those activists. It's just business, Anna. Nothing personal." For a moment, her mask almost slipped. She leaned forward slightly. "You used to believe in something once, didn't you?" He hesitated, caught off guard. "What makes you think that?" She smiled faintly, setting her glass down. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Then she stood and left. When Mikhail looked down at the table, he found a small folded note beside his drink. 2 words were written on it: Murmansk fire. That night, Mikhail couldn't sleep. Memories long buried began to stir. The name, the fire, the girl he had left behind. He didn't know how it connected, but deep down, something told him it wasn't coincidence. The next day, he searched through old records, police files, shipyard reports, anything he could find. And when he saw the name Petrova, the realization hit him like cold water. Anya. He stormed into her office the following evening. The building was nearly empty. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but trembling. She didn't look up from her papers. "You already know." "Anya, my God, you're—" "Don't say my name," she interrupted quietly. "You lost the right to say it the day you ran." He stepped closer, guilt and confusion fighting in his eyes. "I thought you were dead. They told me your family—" "You didn't ask," she cut in sharply. "You didn't want to know. You had your chance to stand with me, and instead you joined them." Mikhail swallowed hard. "You don't understand. I had no choice." She finally looked up, her eyes cold. "We all have choices. You just chose yourself." He stood there in silence, realizing that the girl he had once loved was gone, replaced by a woman forged in fire and ice. Before leaving, he whispered, "If you go after Sokolov, he'll kill you." Anya smiled faintly. "He already did. I'm just returning the favor." From that moment, Mikhail became a ghost in her story, torn between guilt and fear, unsure which would consume him first. Days later, the company faced its worst crisis yet. Government investigators raided their offices, news channels swarmed the streets, investors pulled out, the stock collapsed. Sokolov raged like a cornered animal. He fired half the board, blamed his subordinates, and ordered internal purges. But it was too late. The system was collapsing. Anya moved carefully, destroying every trace of her involvement. But one night, as she returned home, she noticed something unusual. A black car parked across the street, lights off, engine running. It didn't move for hours. She knew what it meant. They had found her. For 3 days, she stayed in shadows, switching hotels, wiping her data, erasing every trail she had left. But you can only outrun your past for so long. On the 4th night, her apartment door was kicked open. She had been expecting it. 2 men in dark coats entered, searching the place. But by the time they reached the living room, Anya was gone, and so were her hard drives. She had left the city already, vanishing like smoke into the cold northern wind. Meanwhile, Viktor Sokolov sat in his mansion, watching news reports about his empire burning. His hands shook with anger as he poured himself a drink. For the first time in years, he looked afraid. Then his phone buzzed. An email. No sender, no subject, just one attachment, a video. He clicked it. The screen showed grainy footage, the old shipyard, flames rising high, people screaming, and then a girl's voice, calm, steady. You took everything from me, my father, my home, my name, now I'm taking yours. The video ended with a single line of text. You built your empire on lies. Let's see how it survives the truth. Sokolov sat there, frozen, the glass trembling in his hand. He knew that voice. He didn't remember the girl's face, but he remembered the fire. By morning, news broke of more leaked documents, this time with his personal signature on every bribe, every cover-up, every murder. His world was ending, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But revenge is never clean. Anya's name began appearing in whispers. Journalists tracing the leaks, investigators connecting dots. She had exposed him completely, but in doing so, she had painted a target on herself. Back in a small coastal town far from the city, she watched the chaos unfold on a flickering television screen. Sokolov was under arrest. Mikhail had disappeared. The empire was gone, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence, heavy and endless. She had won, yes. But she had nothing left to return to. That night she walked to the edge of the frozen shore. The wind howled, the sea glimmered under the moonlight. It's done, she whispered. You can rest now, Papa. A tear rolled down her cheek, freezing in the wind before it could fall. She took off the pendant her mother had given her, the only thing she had kept all these years, and placed it gently in the snow. Then she turned and walked away. The story of Anya Petrova became a mystery, whispered in corners, the woman who brought down an empire and vanished into the cold. Some said she fled the country, others said she was killed. But a few claimed they saw her, years later, working at a small port somewhere near the Arctic, fixing boats and engines, just like her father once did. No one knows the truth. Maybe she finally found peace. Or maybe she was still waiting, watching, ready for the next fire to begin. Some stories don't end with justice or mercy, the narrator says softly. Some just end with silence and the sound of the sea. The city never truly sleeps, even after the fire, after the headlines, after the collapse of Viktor Sokolov's empire. Its heart kept beating. But for Anya Petrova, the rhythm had changed. It no longer pulsed with anger or purpose. It was slower now, quieter, like a song reaching its last note. She had destroyed the man who had taken everything from her. His empire was dust. His name, a curse whispered in courtrooms and newspapers. But victory had a strange taste, metallic, cold, empty. The kind of victory that doesn't heal you, only proves you were right to be broken. For weeks she stayed hidden in a small fishing village north of Arkhangelsk. The sea there was gray and endless, the air heavy with salt and memory. Locals knew her only as Anna, a quiet woman who repaired engines and helped mend nets. She spoke little, smiled rarely. Some nights they would see her walking along the frozen shore, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something that would never come. But beneath that calm surface, the storm hadn't passed. It had simply gone silent. One morning, as snow drifted softly through the window, she opened an envelope that had arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph. Sokolov's face, pale and lifeless, being carried out of his mansion. On the back, a single line was written, "It's over." She stared at it for a long time. There was no joy. No relief. Just a slow exhale. After 10 years of running, fighting, and surviving, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Stillness. That evening, she walked down to the harbor. The air was sharp, the sky painted in shades of dying orange. A thin layer of ice floated on the waves, cracking gently with each motion. She sat on an old bench near the water and took out the locket her mother had given her, the one she had left behind years ago but returned to find after the storm settled. Inside, a small photograph of her family, faded and worn. Her father's smile, her mother's kind eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep, not for revenge, not for anger, but for the girl she had once been. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "But it doesn't bring you back." The wind carried her voice away. Somewhere, far across the waves, the sound faded into silence. As days passed, she began to notice strange things. Unfamiliar faces in the village, footsteps outside her door, whispers that stopped when she entered a room. She knew this was the cost of what she'd done. Empires don't fall quietly, they echo. One night, she returned home to find her door slightly open. Inside, everything was untouched, except for the table, where a single object rested. A photograph of her, taken only a week ago. No note, no message, just proof that someone still remembered. She didn't run this time. She simply sat down, staring at the image, and smiled faintly. "So it ends like this," she murmured. The next morning, she walked to the harbor again. The sky was gray, the water restless. Fishermen watched her quietly as she stepped onto a small boat she had repaired herself. They asked where she was going. "Just out there," she said softly, "for one last look." The engine coughed to life. The boat drifted slowly away from shore. Hours passed. The sea grew rougher, the clouds thickened, but Anya didn't turn back. She kept sailing toward the horizon, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed ahead. In her mind, she replayed everything: the laughter of her childhood, the fire at the shipyard, her father's voice, Mikhail's betrayal, Sokolov's arrogance, the years of struggle, the sound of her own heartbeat when she saw justice finally done. She thought of all the people she had become: the daughter, the lover, the ghost, the avenger. And for the first time, she felt peace. When the storm hit, it came fast: snow, wind, and roaring waves crashing against the hull. She didn't fight it. She simply closed her eyes, tilted her face to the sky, and let the sea take her. Some say the fishermen found the boat days later, drifting empty near the ice fields. Others say it was never found, that it vanished into the fog, swallowed by the same sea that had once defined her childhood. But the villagers still tell her story. They say on quiet nights, when the wind is right, you can hear the echo of an engine in the distance, steady and calm. They say a woman walks along the frozen shore, her coat fluttering in the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Some call it a ghost story. Others call it justice. And the narrator ends softly. Her name was Anya Petrova, a girl born in the cold who lived through fire and found peace in the sea. She didn't win. She didn't lose. She simply became part of the silence she once feared. The camera slowly pans over the frozen waves, endless, gray, and beautiful. The music swells, slow piano, faint strings, fading into the sound of wind. "Some fires never die," the voice whispers. "They just change form and wait beneath the ice."